Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec from Bloomberg Radio.
Listen, a month away from the U.S. election, in some states, early voting has already begun. Much being written about various sectors of the voting public, be it Latin American voters, young men, white women, black men, which leads us, Carol, to a story about an area of the U.S. that's been dubbed one of the best places to be black in America and how it may hold some clues about the future.
Yeah, it's one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg on this Monday. For all the details and why you should care, we head to our Bloomberg News Bureau in Atlanta and to the Bloomberg Bureau Chief there, Brett Pulley. Brett, so glad we could spend some time with you on this story. Take us to Paulding County. Take us to Confederate Avenue. Where is it? What's going on there? And why is it maybe the best place to be black in America?
Hi, Carol. Well, Paulding County is this exurb, sort of out on the peripheral of the Atlanta metropolitan area. It's northwest of Atlanta, maybe 30 to 40 miles. And yes, it's one of these places one of the places you would probably not expect, but has actually been dubbed the best, perhaps, place in America to be black. And this is based on various data, McKinsey data and some other data that shows that based on things such as income and housing and health outcomes, poverty rates, etc., there are few places in the country that tend to be these sort of peripheral communities where in fact the parity, people are nearing parity in terms of the lifestyles of the white residents and the black residents. Not a lot of places, but Paulding County, based on data, is actually number one.
Nearing parity, but not at parity. As you and Kelsey write in the piece, nationwide, the average black household earns $53,000 a year, $42,000 less than the average, or 42%, excuse me, less than the average white household. In Paulding County, the difference is 5%. Black homeownership trails white homeownership by nearly 30 percentage points in the U.S., 11 points in Paulding County. What is unique about these places, though, Brett? Like, what's working in these places that's not working elsewhere? What's unique about these places that isn't around elsewhere?
Well, I think you're right. I think there are some things that work, and I think there are some, cultural and social pioneering that takes place in places like Paulding County. So certainly the availability of land on the outskirts of the suburbs is a factor, and so the affordability of housing is probably priority number one. And then things such as decent schools, of course, and the overall quality of life. Now, at the same time, a lot of these places, in particular Paulding County specifically, have not always been perhaps the most desirable or even most welcoming places when we talk about diversity. So in Paulding County, for example, which has long been predominantly white, predominantly Republican, the population over the last few decades has gone from about 4% black to about 25% black. And so as Stacey Abrams, a former governor here in Georgia, put it, this is demographics meeting opportunity.
So, and I also think about in an election year, what this means potentially. I've got family who have been East Coasters most of their life, but slowly moving down south. And so you see a lot of that, right? Folks from the East kind of transplant. And so I do think about how that starts to change the political landscape. I mean, this is an area, you note in the story, you and Kelsey, that Paulding has voted reliably Republican since the 1980s. So I do wonder if these migrational shifts continue, what it means for politics going forward.
Yeah, no, you're right, Carol. I mean, this is kind of the great migration in reverse, right? Mm-hmm. For a couple of generations, we saw so many black families, so many black residents of the South who migrated to the industrial North, of course. And now we're seeing a reverse migration. And what we're seeing this time, in fact, is we're seeing a migration of people who have the financial wherewithal and the opportunity to choose to live where they choose to live. And so as a result, a place like Paulding County is indeed seeing a change in its demographics and a slow change in its politics, I think. They elected their first black elected official in the county, several years back. Since then, redistricting has drawn that person out of the county, so the change is slow.
And yet, change is slow. It's still called Confederate Avenue in the middle of town.
And that's been a point of contention there. You're right. And these are the kinds of things that are part of the sort of social and cultural tension that I think goes along with this, this economic pioneering that takes place. And yes, there are places such as Confederate Avenue there in town. There's been a movement to change the name because of the implications. That hasn't gone anywhere. There's been tension in some of the schools. There have been some concerns among the black parents that their kids may not have been getting fair treatment in school. So these are the kinds of growing pains, I think, that places like Paulding County will, inevitably experience.
Well, and that's, I think, just to dig a little bit deeper, I mean, as you point out in talking to various residents, it's not like racism doesn't exist in the area, correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, and we're not even talking about ancient history necessarily. Mm-hmm. Paulding County is a place where when Barack Obama was running the first time, 2012, I think, or that's the second time?
Yeah, 08.
2012, that there was actually a sign posted outside of one of the bars there that said, I do not support the N-word or something. Mm-hmm. The owner felt it was his right to express free speech in that way. And then, of course, the Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, her district also encompasses parts of Paulding County. She's been an outspoken supporter of Donald Trump and election denier. So it gives you a sense of the sort of clash of cultures that's taking place in the county.
In your view, after going there and reporting this out, Brett, do we see more areas like Paulding County emerge in the coming years, or fewer?
Well, no, I think the expectation is that we absolutely do see more. And, and there are some others that are some of these exurbs outside of cities such as Washington, D.C. and Houston and other places around the country where the trend is very much the same. And, as people search for opportunities for their families and search for great housing and schools and the things that go along with that, there will be some areas that will continue to change and evolve, like Paulding County.
Well, you took us there, and we really appreciate it. As we said, it's among the most read stories on the Bloomberg, a snapshot of, one of the areas around this country and what it could mean longer term. Brett Pulley, thank you so much. Brett is, of course, Atlanta Bureau Chief here at Bloomberg News.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
We begin this hour with a double dose of Boeing. Looking at the stock, it's down about 1.5%. You know the Boeing saga. From a freak accident that blew a door-sized hole into the fuselage of an airborne 737 MAX to revelations of sloppy workmanship and now a crippling strike entering its second month. The icon of U.S. manufacturing has been beset by trouble since the first days of January. It's been a rough 2024.
Yeah, Bloomberg News senior aerospace reporter Julie Johnsson reminding us of that. She's with us from Los Angeles. Boeing shares, by the way, hitting a 52-week low today, down 42% so far this year. Julie, it's just one bad headline and story after another for Boeing. On Friday, a big job cut, 10% of its workforce, about 17,000 people. Help us understand, after a weekend of thinking about this, writing about this, how, if at all, that could help turn the ship at Boeing.
Yeah, right. And a weekend of no sleep either.
Sorry.
That's just me. Ron Epstein, the Bank of America analyst, coined this phrase, perpetual doom loop. And it really encapsulates very nicely where Boeing is right now, where every one of its crises, and they're multiple, sort of feeds into each other. And they all, it seems like, are getting worse to some degree, especially with this strike. So the they've indicated they're gonna have a really messy Q3 when they report earnings on the 23rd. It's gonna be an awful quarter. And the strike started 2 weeks before the end of that. So the problems at the company were profound before workers walked off the job. That much is clear.
So one thing that kind of struck me in your reporting, Julie, is a quote from the CEO, Kelly Ortberg, who said in announcing these dramatic job cuts, he said, we need to be clear-eyed about the work we face and realistic about the time it will take to achieve key milestones on the path to recovery. We also need to focus our resources on performing and innovating in the areas that are core to who we are. So what does it mean? What does he mean in terms of what those core areas are and what that means to getting the company back on track?
Okay, so that's, Ortberg has only been on the job since August 8, and I think he's not sugarcoating things for workers. And this is, we've been waiting to see what his strategy is going to be in turning around Boeing, but he's making clear this is not the company it was, and the company's going to have to make some really hard decisions. Boeing is, he's hinting, we think, at maybe some asset sales, maybe bigger changes to come. But I think the job cuts are just a reality of they're in a really deep crisis right now. They've got to stem the bleeding, and so that's there's no deferring and being optimistic that things are going to turn around on a dime. So that's one message there. It also is a not so subtle message to the union, by the way, that he's turning up the heat on them as well, and that there are consequences to this strike.
Julie, I'm wondering about the future in terms of this being a crucial supplier to the United States, a crucial employer in the United States, playing a crucial role in the U.S. economy when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to GDP here in the U.S. Is there a place in the near future where the U.S. steps in with some sort of rescue, with some sort of solution? After all, Boeing's biggest rival, Airbus, has been known to get support from the European Union.
Yeah, Tim, that's such a great question. And we've been, I think we've been wondering how the Biden administration is going to play this. And it's a dilemma for them because, Joe Biden is famously, pro-union, very much on the side of the workers, and the union has the leverage right now. So they're walking a little bit of a tightrope too, as to when they weigh in and how. And a colleague was pointing out, Boeing's issues aren't just on the commercial side. We're starting to see the depth of the problems at their defense business at a time when other defense contractors, frankly, are minting money. Can I say that? So, so you wonder if the Pentagon maybe. Is there a way to come back and restructure some of these deals that Boeing signed a decade ago when they were awash in cash, and that that are just going to be bleeding money for at least another 2 years?
We're going to talk a little bit more about whether the government can provide some assistance, especially on the defense side or the Defense Department. When we catch up with Thomas Black, we're going to have that conversation right after we finish up with Julie. But Julie, while we still have you, you remind us in the story that Boeing let go of its head of the defense and space business. And it makes me wonder, we have had so many conversations about how Boeing is important to the national security of the United States. So if they let go of their defense unit, are they as important? And will the government still feel potentially some pressure to assist this company?
Well, another way to think of this, and by the way, Ted Colbert, who was the first person, walked out the door, the first high-ranking official walked out the door under Ortberg. He is well liked, and he inherited a horrible hand. So it was an interesting move, and there are people who are sympathetic to him, but it came right after Ortberg had met with the Pentagon and got an earful, and right after the Starliner, which is, that debacle,
Right.
and that was also one of Ted's divisions. And that might have been as much Ortberg sending a message to the Pentagon, I hear you. We get your frustrations, we're on it. As I think that might have been a big part of the motivation.
Julie, the question that I always have for you is about alienating customers here. Again, this is fair to say this is pretty much a duopoly between Boeing and Airbus when it comes to the aircraft that they provide customers around the world. These are the airlines we're talking about. To what extent is this affecting customers in the sense that, they're not going to order planes from Boeing and they're going to instead go to Airbus, all with the really important caveat that Airbus is at capacity, at least for the A320, through the end of the decade.
And beyond.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the rub right there. It's not like customers, as frustrated as they are, can have anywhere to go. And Airbus, by the way, is also dealing with massive supplier issues and is probably not going to hit its production targets this year. It's already signaled that. So the industry is really having a moment right now. But the pain and the spotlight is on Boeing.
How worried, Julie, do we need to be worried about the balance sheet? And we've talked a lot about it's just kind of remarkable, our concerns about this company when it comes to potentially what we're seeing in terms of cash and so on. So how worried do we need to be here?
Oh, I think that's a huge issue right now for Boeing. There's no doubt about that. And the ratings agencies have all, signaled that a downgrade to junk status is definitely being seriously considered. And so Boeing's burning through cash. And so they've got to do something. We've reported that they're seriously considering an equity raise, and the analysts wondered if this Friday announcement, where they showed their hand for the earnings, if that was maybe starting to clear the deck for the company to go back to the market and, sell stock.
Julie, you mentioned that the idea of potentially selling assets. I thought Boeing was now in the business of buying back some of these assets that it had shed over the past 20, 30 years. What's going on there?
Oh my goodness, Tim. Yes, exactly right. They've bought back one of the big factories that they outsourced, and it built structures for the fighter jets in St. Louis. They've already done that. They're in the process of buying back Spirit Aerosystems, which was, a crucial supplier for every major Boeing commercial jet program. Builds big chunks of the airplanes, and it was a former Boeing division that was spun off in 2005. So that's still to come. That deal closes next year, and That's Boeing's going to pay for it with stock. It's very expensive. So it's Boeing's got to sell to buy, right?
Lots of moving parts.
The doom loop. We started with the doom loop. We end with the doom loop.
Unbelievable. Julie Johnsson, thanks so much. Bloomberg News senior aerospace reporter. We're staying with Boeing, specifically now to a Bloomberg opinion column about how the plane-making giant needs to help to what it really needs specifically to stem some of its cash burn and losses. And I got to say, I've been thinking about this, whether or not the government has to come in. It's something we just touched on too with Julie.
This column by Thomas Black, who totally gets this space. He's manufacturing, logistics, and aerospace columnist at Bloomberg Opinion. He joins us from Dallas. Check out his column on the Bloomberg terminal and at bloomberg.com/opinion. Thomas, we asked Julie about the potential of a government, I don't want to say bailout, but some sort of assistance in the context of
Or should
Airbus.
we call it a bailout?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you lay out a really interesting case in your story that has to do with renegotiating specific contracts with the Department of Defense. How would you characterize, well, explain what it is, and then how would you characterize this type of renegotiation?
Well, Boeing has these fixed price contracts that they entered into. It's in their defense unit. They also have some space contracts that are in that same regime. The problem is that you get paid one fixed price, and if you go over budget, then that's all on you. And I think some of these contracts were negotiated before we had the big spike in the inflation rate, and also we had all kinds of pandemic problems. So the company is now kind of on the hook for these contracts. I think the Defense Department, given the circumstance that Boeing is in, maybe could ease up on those and help the cash burn a bit on that side. That would be for the defense side, which, as you know, they announced $2 billion of charges just in that unit alone. In the commercial aircraft, where everybody is kind of focused, there is $3 billion of charges. So it's consequential.
But Thomas, the problems at Boeing aren't just about a cash problem. I understand that that's a big one, considering that their free cash flow losses have continued in the third quarter. But what about the cultural issues, the quality control issues? I mean, how does cash fix that?
Well, it all goes back to the strike right now. They absolutely have to get this resolved one way or the other. And then they can start working on all these issues, right? Because a lot of those employees that they're going to have to try to retrain and set a different culture, they're all on strike right now and kind of angry. So that needs to be resolved first, and then everybody needs to get together and work to get production going again and install all these quality programs that they have to do. They can't really do any of that while they're still on the streets.
I don't have to tell you, we live in a pretty politically charged time right now, and I'm wondering if you would characterize the renegotiation of these contracts as a bailout. Like, how would it be framed?
It would be, one side would probably call it a bailout, but even if they did, I would think people shouldn't have a problem with that. Boeing isn't just your casual corporate stock right now. It really is a national security issue. Boeing is the only company in North America that makes commercial airliners, the large ones. We do have another company in Brazil that makes regional jets, but this is the only company that does that. We have several companies that make fighter jets, but Boeing is the only one that makes commercial airliners, and we cannot exit that market. So Boeing is too important to fail. Right now, it looks like there's equity market interest in this to sell some shares. I think investors see that big backlog of planes that they have and say there's lots of cash to unlock there if they could just execute. So I think there is going to be some appetite for Boeing to sell shares and try to raise some cash that way. But if the strike continues and continues to have its problems, that could be the ultimate backstop for the government to say, you know what, we need to step in and make sure this company doesn't fail.
Thomas, what do we know about the people that they're letting go? I was trying to get my head around, like, if they're quality issues, like, have they figured out where the problems are? The people that they are letting go, are they involved in, does it not matter who, in terms of the jobs they do, or do they need these people? Like, I'm just trying to get my head around it.
I don't think we have enough details there. I think it's pretty clear that they're not unionized workers. In other words, the ones that are on the factory floor. It seems like it's more corporate management and engineers and so forth, the white-collar workers, if you will. This seems to be a measure that's going to be rolled out over time. Sometimes companies do this. They make a big announcement, and they're hoping that in the end, maybe they can turn things around. They won't have to fire so many people. So I think we need more details on that.
Hey, Thomas, just 30 seconds left. Bring us up to speed very briefly, just sort of where Airbus has been when it comes to the close to 2-decade trade dispute that these two companies had with the European Union. We only have like 30 seconds left, but there is a history of subsidies in this industry.
There is a history of subsidies. I'm not sure it's black and white where one doesn't subsidize and the other does. But in the end, there's two main builders of commercial airliners, and Airbus now is in the catbird seat. It's gaining market share. It does have some constraints on its capacity, but you can bet they're going to be investing to increase that capacity because they do have the upper hand right now.
Yeah, when we think about corporate stories of 2024, this is certainly one of them. Thomas Black, thank you so much. Manufacturing, logistics, and aerospace columnist at our Bloomberg opinion team, talking about Boeing, which is down about 1.4%, down more than 42% so far in 2024.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Josh Reeves co-founded and runs a nearly $10 billion company. It handles all the stuff, it seems, a lot of founders really don't want to handle. We're talking HR, payroll, benefits. Gusto has raised more than $700 million and does payroll processing for more than 300,000 small and medium-sized businesses. To put that in perspective, Carol, they do payroll processing for more than 6% of employers in the U.S.
We're going to pick his brain about how the small and medium-sized world is doing. Josh Reeves is the co-founder and CEO of Gusto. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. So before we get to your business and the vantage point you have, Josh, tell us what you're seeing when it comes to kind of the economic outlook and market outlook for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, the backbone of our economy.
Well, first off, great to be here. And yes, we do love serving small and medium-sized business. I always love to remind folks they are the foundation for a lot of society. When you think of people and the businesses they can remember, it's often the communities that are near them. One thing we can see in our data, and it's also in the census data, there's a lot of new businesses being formed across the country, over 550,000 new employers in the U.S. in this past year. That's something that got kickstarted and became stronger with COVID, and that's a tailwind to our business because we focus a lot on serving new employers when they hire their first employee.
Where are the areas of strength, at least in your data geographically?
So we see some strength more in the south east.
So sort of the Sun Belt?
A little bit more Sun Belt.
Okay.
But then we also, and I would point to, published quite a bit of content here. We call it Gustonomics. If anyone is ever interested in exploring.
Yeah, we're interested in that stuff.
Economists on staff, where we try to make that visible to anyone.
No, we don't like data at all. Go ahead.
That's like our thing. But so you're seeing Sun Belt areas of weakness?
Areas of strength.
I know, but so what areas of weakness are you seeing?
Areas of weakness can tend to be more in the major cities.
Still?
That's gotten a little bit better in the last couple of years, but some of that's still hanging on. But it is also industry by industry, and I need to look back at the data myself. I love to remind folks there's more dentist offices in the U.S. than tech startups. So even though I live in and based in Silicon Valley, we obviously care a lot about that mainstream SMB audience.
Well, so then you have a great window into where communities are developing and moving towards. And I just think about the conversation we had last hour with our Brett Pulley, taking us to a place where you're seeing a lot of migration happening and something you hadn't seen. The pandemic did that too. So tell us about that shift, what you're seeing, where communities where we maybe didn't have them, all of a sudden you see them really growing up.
Well, it specifically shows up in our business in what we would call multi-state employment. So just the ability for a 5-10 person company now to have employees be in multiple states. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of positive to that. You can access new talent pools. One of the biggest negatives is because of how the U.S. was formed, local, state, and federal rules are quite different by region. And so that's where we also can try to be helpful, is make it easier to kind of abstract that complexity. But we do talk about this compliance inflation concept that is still happening across the country.
Because that means different payroll rules and regulations depending on the state that they live in.
And the county and the town. And a lot of times it's basically highly variable. It ties to what that specific jurisdiction chose to do. And it's not just payroll. It could also be employment filings. It could be compliance requirements. Mm-hmm. Think about just all the different government rules that get created, really agnostic to administration. Generally, it's just been more, not less. And a business owner, especially a small business owner, has to do it all on their own.
How quickly do you get insight into what's going on in the economy? For example, when we see a jobs number for September, a payrolls number that's just a blowout number, is that not a surprise to you because you're seeing the same thing at your level?
So it increasingly is getting to interesting scale. As you mentioned, we're at over 300,000 businesses.
Like, when will we start talking not about the ADP numbers that we get, but about the Gusto numbers that we get each month?
Maybe Gustonomics becomes that next alternative.
But seriously, I mean, you're 6% of employers in the country. Like, that's a real window. That's a huge sample size.
Yeah, and we see all the data related to benefits enrollment, salary distributions, wage increases or decreases, hiring, offboarding, all that shows up inside our data.
Or the Beige Book calls you up, or the Fed officials call you up, or do they already?
I mean, we have work we try to do on policy side to bring the voice of small business to policymakers. There's a whole host of folks that would like access to this type of data more in the hedge fund world that we avoid and do not engage with, obviously.
So Josh, if there's a net in terms of what you're seeing, your window into the U.S. economy, what are the words you would use to describe the economy based on that data?
Never been a better time to start a small business. And part of that is not just because of the trend we see concretely, but also companies like us trying to help make their life easier.
So is it sort of puzzling to you to see Kamala Harris and Donald Trump out there on the campaign trail trying to make it even more attractive to small business owners?
I don't think it's logical to me that folks are going to evangelize small, medium-sized business.
But you said there's never been a better time.
But the key is, what are you doing about it, right? I mean, small, medium-sized business leads to employment. Employment is a good thing in any kind of politician's career. So, we're agnostic politically, but I'm not surprised that politicians talk a lot about SMBs. There is even lots of good policy, tax credit policy that have been created for SMBs. Again, them actually being able to access these different government programs has been the complexity historically.
Okay, you say it's never been a better time to be running a smaller, medium-sized business. What about a tech company based in Silicon Valley that's been valued at nearly $10 billion, that's raised $700 million in financing? Sounds like your company.
Sounds like, well, I view all of those as byproducts, right? If we can serve hundreds of thousands of businesses, solve real pain in their life, we will grow and have higher valuation, but that's not what we obsess over. But 13 years in, I am really excited. I feel like we're still early in the journey. We only serve 7% of these companies. There's so much more to do.
Well, do you stay then with small and medium sized, or do you go all the way?
So we do have our foundation in small, medium size. And I love to remind folks there's more dentist offices than tech startups, right? I said that earlier. And so, we're only at 6-7% market share. And a lot of tech companies historically just jump to mid-market enterprise. We've built a great business serving small, medium size. We're excited to reinforce that for many years to come.
So you don't need to tap into, I think of, there's you guys, or there's something like an ADP, right? You don't need to service the big publicly held companies, or do you want to at some point?
I mean, we want to solve pain wherever it is, but there's a lot of work to do for small, medium-sized business. One thing I'll share, ADP is a $100 billion plus company. Mm-hmm. Intuit is a company we respect that also cares a lot about SMB. But you have close to 25% of companies in the US today still doing payroll by hand on pen and paper.
So there's a lot of room
there. There's a lot of fragmentation and a lot of greenfield.
You're based in Silicon Valley. Have you spent much time in New York in recent months? And my question is going somewhere.
We have an office here.
Okay.
Be careful how you answer.
Yeah, we love New York. I love New York.
So have you ridden the subway much?
I rode the subway to this office.
Did you see lots of ads for competitors to your company? Because sometimes I get in a subway car and I'm like, I've never heard of this competitor to Gusto. Would be like, it's not Rippling, it's not Deal, it's not JustWorks. I mean, these are all startups that are trying to do what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
I mean, there's a huge opportunity here. So we are excited to compete, press our advantage, launch the best possible product, keep winning market share, keep winning wallet share. But yeah, I would be shocked if there wasn't competition when you have a big market opportunity. I think it is hard to build what we've built from scratch. So I think people take different approaches to it, but we feel like we have a leading position and we want to maintain that.
So do you go public at some point?
We'll be a public company eventually. It's a milestone in the journey, but we're going to be building Gusto for many decades. The thing I anchor on more is we'll be an independent company for many, many decades to come. It goes to why we started the business in the first place.
So, but no pressure to do so, right? You're finding the funding that you need, and it provides you a certain luxury, right, in terms of building it out.
Well, Gusto at this scale, we're free cash flow positive, have been for several quarters. We can self-fund, be aggressive on R&D, launch new products in the time tracking space, launch new products in the international hiring space, launch new products in the Gusto embedded payroll space. We can talk about that too. But again, just there's a huge, huge market opportunity here. And the beauty of being a private company, there's some positives as well.
We work for a private company, in case you didn't notice, and we understand the benefits.
I wondered about different opportunities that are sort of adjacent to the core business here. The idea of catering to specific types of businesses and what you've done in recent years to make it easier for a small gym, for example, or for some sort of hair salon or appointment bookings, like getting into the space that isn't necessarily what you're known for, but are sort of add-ons for the core business.
So first, it comes with customer pull, right? They're asking for us to help with these additional product areas. And it could be health benefits, it could be tax credits, it could be, business insurance, workers' comp. These are all adjacent pain points. And again, this is where we can be a conduit for big companies that have had access to a lot of specialists and resources, whether it's cloud, paperless, mobile, or AI as kind of a more recent technology tailwind. We are going to be the ones to bring those benefits to small, medium-sized business. So yeah, we have a big roadmap of product apps to kind of go launch, bring live, lots of work ahead.
What exactly does embedding payroll mean?
So think of this as, if you're familiar with Stripe and embedded payments, basically analogous, but for payroll. So one of our partners is Chase. They have a product called Chase Payroll, but it is powered by Gusto. So if you're a Chase customer, a business customer, you will have the chance to go add payroll to your experience inside Chase, but then Chase didn't have to build it all from scratch. So it's another avenue for us to reach SMBs where they are already versus what we're doing already on the gusto.com side.
Can you do that with multiple banks?
Yes, we have dozens of partners, not just Chase.
Okay.
And we're excited about this big trend. Embedded payroll didn't exist till a couple of years ago. And again, we think it's just a very logical product for any SMB platform out there to launch live.
What's the hard part? You said pretty optimistic, which is great.
Yeah.
But what's the thing that you still feel like you have a nut to crack?
Oh, broadly speaking, how to keep improving, running a great company, attracting great talent. 13 years in, I feel like we're early. Everything has to keep changing, evolving, and getting better. We're doing a lot of work to kind of revamp our product suite, our underlying data model. I could go on and on.
30 seconds, international opportunity. You mentioned international. How tough is that?
So on the employer side, the U.S. is like 50 countries. We are U.S. focused today, but we feel like we did a fair bit of work to expand across the country. It's not if, but when we would serve international employers. But right now our focus is on U.S.-based employers.
So if you are a small business owner who has employees outside of the U.S., you can't be served?
You can use Gusto. So I'm talking about employer. On the employee side, you can now hire in over 100 countries on the contractor front. And on the EOR side, you can also hire in over 10 countries, more to come.
Pretty cool stuff. Great. Well, stay in touch. Let us know how things are going. Really appreciate it. Josh Reeves, co-founder and chief executive officer of, I said Gusto, but it's Gusto.
We say both, yeah, with Gusto.
I was giving it a little oomph.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Well, last week, President Biden met with Irish Prime Minister Simon Harris at the White House. The occasion was to celebrate a century of relations between the U.S. and Ireland, though it did turn to concerns about the conflict in the Middle East that the Irish Prime Minister said of his conversation with the president. That relationship between the U.S. and Ireland, certainly a focus for Michael Lohan. He's CEO of IDA Ireland. It's the country's investment promotion and development agency, so it's his job to get foreign investors to spend money in Ireland, to set up shop there, and bring their dollars to the country. He joins us here once again in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. How are you?
I'm good, Tim. Thank you.
Good to see you.
And you too. Great to be back in New York.
Hey, I kind of want to start with what's going on in Washington because the Prime Minister was there last week with our president. President Biden has a close relationship with Ireland.
Yes.
And he's not going to be there come January. How are you thinking about Harris, about Trump, and what the White House looks like post January 20th, 2025?
Yeah, so you're correct. And Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, came over last week to Washington, and I think first of all it was to mark the 100-year, I suppose, anniversary of U.S.-Irish diplomatic and economic ties, which I suppose really is the first point we have to highlight. Is it's a long and deep relationship between our two nations, and we're not just tied economically. I think we're tied socially, we're tied in our history, and as we look forward from my position, in IDA Ireland, as we look to attract foreign direct investment from across the globe, and particularly here from the US, which is so critically important to us and to the global economy, because the US drives innovation, and we've seen the benefit of that in Ireland. But remember, like over our 75-year history, we've celebrated 75 years in IDA. We've worked with 14 different presidents during that period. I don't see that changing as we go forward. We continue to work and bring value, and I think that's from an Ireland perspective. Our focus has to be on what we bring to if you want to call it, to the equation.
Well, President Trump has promised to lower the corporate tax rate. And if he's able to, again, a lot of this, we talk about this all the time. We remind everybody that just because a politician makes a proposal, especially when it comes to taxes, doesn't necessarily mean it will become law. However, if he is successfully able to do that, does that make Ireland less attractive for American companies?
So there's a number of reasons why I think any company looks to invest internationally, and taxation is one of those. But I think it's one of many functions. You'll hear, and you probably would have heard your earlier, I suppose, contributors speak about talent. If I'm honest, if someone wants to ask me what's the fundamental piece that I hear from I suppose CEOs and C-suite leaders across the globe is talent. And then they're looking for stability of I suppose, political stability and also regulatory stability. And yes, taxation comes into that. There is no shadow about that. But it is more than beyond tax. I think that's the key is you have to have, and I've said this previously as well, is that you can have the best tax system in the world, or let's call it the most aggressive tax system if you want to put it in that context. But without people, without innovation, without policy, taxation alone won't stand. So you have to make sure you have the mix correct. And I think that's what we in Ireland focus on, is making sure we're competitive on tax. We don't make an apology for that, because I think we have to be competitive. It's a global world, but we have to match that with the innovation, with the talent, with the infrastructure, with the stability politically to make that happen as well.
But there has been a lot of concerns out of European allies in particular about, what it would mean for a second Donald Trump administration, concerns about it being a serious issue for Europe, concerns about what it would mean going forward. There's concerns that the guardrails wouldn't be there when it comes to geopolitics and other issues. On the other hand, interesting story in the New York Times this morning, I think it was, or over the weekend, about a lot of people think that it's just talk from Donald Trump, maybe to kind of unsettle some of his allies or the U.S. allies or some of the U.S. foes. What are the conversations you all are having about it?
So
especially when there are European officials or officials from your country that are citing concerns.
Absolutely, and you're correct, and I think, but a lot of this is in conversation at the moment, and I think we need to put it in that context. Just last week, actually, I spent a number of days in Brussels, just to I suppose in some ways to immerse myself in what's happening in that world as well from a European perspective. So it's because it's important to hear it firsthand, and also it's important to be part of that conversation. And if you think, and you go back to the Draghi report, which came out in the most recent weeks, what does it speak to? It speaks to a few pieces, but it speaks to having a Europe that's innovative, a Europe that's regulated in the correct manner, a European Union also that focuses on decarbonisation and the green economy. But it also speaks to the importance of international and global trade. And I think when all of the, if you want to call it, the rhetoric dies down in terms of elections, and this has been the year of elections and continues to be, right. As we know in Ireland, we're going in that direction ourselves. But when it comes back to it, I think governments and industries have to look at global markets. That's because if you're an industry at the front end of your innovation, you're actually looking to internationalize. You want to look for new markets, and you want to look for as I mentioned, the best available talent, and that comes from across the globe as well.
But Michael, when you were in Brussels, was there nervousness about the outcome of the U.S. election? As you say, what happens in the U.S. economy, I think you kicked our conversation up, how important it is in terms of driving things globally. So I'm curious, when you were in Brussels, what you were hearing.
Yeah, I don't think there was a nervousness. I think there's an acceptance that there's a process ongoing, and obviously the election of the U.S. president is a democratic right of the U.S. people, just like it is in Ireland when we elect our prime minister. So I don't think there's a nervousness. I think there's a consciousness, and we've seen that geopolitical, I suppose, there's been geopolitical churn in the last 18 months in particular across the globe. Right. We've seen industrial policy completely shift and change. And you can look at that in a positive and negative, but ultimately I think what I see from governments, they're starting to look at where is the advantages in terms of those industrial policies to ensure that you're getting the right outcomes, that you're not stifling innovation, or indeed that you're not causing a consumer concern in terms of costs, and getting that balance right between, if you want to call it, innovation and the consumer needs is going to be so critically important.
I know it's not all about taxes, but I have another tax question.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay. We covered this closely on Bloomberg, but last month Apple lost its court fight over that $14.4 billion Irish tax bill. The EU Court of Justice backed this 2016 decision that Ireland broke state aid law by giving Apple an unfair advantage. How did that reverberate in your world?
So in our world, obviously, there's a few things maybe to say about it in context. Obviously, it dates back to a period that's in probably almost 20 years at this juncture. The rules have significantly changed, in terms of the OECD BEPS process, and in my engagement over the last, so when this broke, it's just a month or so. I've been in the marketplace. I've been in the US, on 2 occasions. I've been into Europe, as I mentioned. And honestly, it's not been raised by client companies. And why? Because I think to see it as historic, to see it as what it was, to see it as a determination in terms of an adjudication, in terms of as you mentioned, a state aid element. And I think companies have moved on, and I think the OECD's BEPS process has brought, if you want to call it, clarity as well in terms of international tax.
It also means your government is getting a lot of cash.
Yeah, well, certainly that's a question for our government, and obviously we had our budget 2 weeks ago, and that I suppose we're very fortunate in Ireland that we had a budget surplus, notwithstanding the judgment from the European Court of Justice. But secondly, I think we're putting it to the right areas, infrastructure, and I've spoken openly about as an Irish economy, we need to plan for the next generation of growth, and that next generation of growth requires enhanced infrastructure, because not alone has our industrial base improved in Ireland, both FDI and indeed indigenous as well, which Ireland is now the 7th largest investor in the US. People might consider that Ireland, a small nation, is the 7th largest, but we need to continue to invest in our infrastructure, in our talent, and that's exactly what this capital is going to do.
I got to stick with the T word, but this time tariffs. If indeed we get a Trump administration for a second time, and his administration imposes tariffs on a lot of imported goods into the United States, what are the implications globally?
So I think globally the implications, will cause a shockwave. Let's be honest. I'm still on the view that tariffs are at one level they're a blunt instrument for a particular reason, and in some cases they are maybe justified in some areas. But if we talk about general tariffs, and what I spoke about earlier, they will actually in some ways I'm not sure that tariffs is the best response for any economy to push forward in terms of innovation, in terms of growth, in terms of market access, and ultimately, I think that the consumer will be the person that actually will find itself at the brunt of those tariffs as opposed to anything else. So I think a tick for tat and tariffs is not helpful for Europe, for the US, or indeed if we think about Asia as well.
Then why do you think it's such a central point to at least one candidate's economic policy here in the US?
Well, I can't comment as to why it's a central point, but
it does seem it seems to resonate too.
Maybe it does resonate, and I think it resonates. But I just wonder. It's like everything. You have to think about maybe the unintended consequences of certain tariffs and what they might do. And it's a bit like you can bring this down to very simple terms. If I decide I want to maybe be better at you at playing golf, and I put a different handicap on you, that's one way of doing it. But it doesn't improve my golf. It just brings your golf back
Guarantee
down.
You're better at golf.
Well, no, I'm not. So that's why I chose golf, because I'm not a golf player. Right? So, yeah.
When you look at the global economy, how do you see things right now?
So how do I see things? Interesting. I think there's a level of cautiousness around the global economy. I do think there's real opportunity for growth. The areas for growth that we see is obviously the explosion that's happening with AI. Continues at a pace. There's no doubt that it's driving a need for sustainable and renewable energy. And also I think if we look at the opportunity, of AI, of semiconductors, of healthcare, we see these as key areas for growth for the next future. And as we're looking to our new strategy, which we are now, we'll be launching a new strategy next year. There are 3 main components we're seeing. It's going to be sustainably led, it's going to be across healthcare, and it's going to be across AI and digital, including semicon. So they're the areas that are going to drive, I think, the next generation of growth.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
You're very
always
welcome.
good to see you.
I feel like I had another question, but we've run out of time.
Yeah, you can try.
Hence
try.
Geopolitics, big concern. 30 seconds left here. I mean, we talk about Russia, Ukraine, obviously the Middle East.
Yeah, it is a concern. First of all, I think it's a major concern, not just for business, but I think at a humanitarian level. And I think, first of all, that's where our thoughts go to. And hopefully we see resolution. And just to say, and finally, we know in Ireland, what conflict brings. We also know what peace brings. And I think we know we have to get get to peace in some of these jurisdictions.
Michael, thank you always for stopping by our studio. Michael Lohan, he's Chief Executive Officer of IDA Ireland, of course, involved with all things economic when it comes to economic development between Ireland and the rest of the world, joining us right here in our Interactive Broker studio. This is Bloomberg Businessweek.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, TikTok, everybody. Just about 18 and a half minutes left to go until we wrap up.
Is
What?
that it? 18 and a half minutes to go?
Yeah. Wow. Funny, time flies, as we like
Carol.
to say. Yeah, and we're looking at what could be, is likely to be at this point, another record on the S&P 500. So we had, I think, both the Dow and the S&P hitting records on Friday. We were off, coming back from California, but yeah, that's what it looks like.
Okay.
Should we get to it?
Yeah, let's see what Dana Dioria has to say about this. She's Co-Chief Investment Officer over at Envestnet, a provider of tech to banks and RIAs. Think wealth management software and consulting services to financial advisors. Envestnet has a great view on what's going on when it comes to asset allocation, how people are thinking about the trade, and how people are thinking about markets. Dana joins us from Pennsylvania. Dana, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're doing pretty well. Good to have you back. What record? 46th, Carol?
Yeah, we could see 46 on the S&P 500. Welcome back. Good to see you, although I will say I liked seeing you on Huntington Beach.
Oh, yeah, you guys were out there together in California a few weeks ago.
What a way to do a broadcast.
Oh, nice. Very different weather here.
Yeah, very different weather. Tim makes a good point. 46 record, it looks likely.
We don't know what's going to happen in the next 17 minutes.
Right, but basically what? Any gain, is going to be another record for the S&P 500. The dynamics behind these record moves, this climb, continual climb higher here in 2024, is it justifiable in your view, Dana?
Well, I mean, we're cutting into what appears to be strength. So to a certain extent, I would say yes. I mean, typically when you're going into a cutting cycle, and we just had the Fed give us 50 basis points, you might be thinking that you'd be seeing some, bad data, right? Some data that suggests that things are slowing. But in fact, it looks like earnings season's off to a pretty good start. I mean, it's not spectacular, but you have some beats going on, which is nice to see. It wasn't a huge bogey, right, that we have to meet. So we actually have a chance to really kind of outpace on the earnings side. And of course, we're seeing unemployment still looking great. Unemployment actually dropping a little bit as we have these rate cuts. So to a certain extent, yeah, it's understandable.
All right, so we have some Fed chatter today. Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari saying it appears likely that, quote, further modest reductions in the central bank's benchmark interest rate will be appropriate in the coming quarters. Looks like Waller also making some comments. That's Federal Reserve Governor Chris Waller saying recent economic data signals policymakers can approach subsequent interest rate reductions with less urgency than they applied at their gathering last month. Once again, everybody was so optimistic about how many and how aggressive the Fed might be the rest of 2024, and it feels like we've pulled back on that. Does it matter to you that much how much we get from the Fed? If the economy is growing, if earnings are growing, that's what matters. If people are at work, that's what matters.
Well, I mean, your point is valid, right? At the end of the day, if it's another 75 or only another 50 through the course of the rest of this year, how much did that really drive anything? I think you're right. Ultimately, the question is, are we going to stick the landing or not? Mm-hmm. I think the Fed's going to come down one way or the other. And if we stick the landing and the Fed's coming down, that's really positive news, right? For stocks, that's a good thing. Obviously, we still have inflation's giving mixed signals a little bit, right? PCE came in nice, but core inflation looks a little tough. I remain in the camp that if inflation did kind of start to spike, the Fed it would look very bad for the Fed, to do 50 and then keep jamming new cuts. So I personally think it's more likely to be 25 and 25, but candidly, I was wrong I thought we'd only get 25 this last time, and they went with the full 50. I think it's data driven, right? And the data's kind of mixed and lagged, and being revised. So, that extra 25 basis points, to the extent the market prices it in, makes a little bit of a difference. But the big question is exactly what you're saying. Do we stick the landing here?
Mm-hmm. And I will point out that when we talked in California, in Huntington Beach at Future Proof, Dana, it was just ahead of the Fed meeting that week. And I will say, Tim, one of the things we got in her notes was inflation is the fly in the ointment, and it continues to be so. Even Fed's Waller, calling out the latest inflation data, which came in hotter than estimated, and I guess calling it disappointing.
Dana, to that point, when would you be comfortable saying that the landing has stuck? Whether or not it's a soft landing, whether it's no landing.
Yeah.
When will you say that the plane has landed?
That's such a fair question, right? I mean, in some ways you could say it already landed, at some point. Cyclical markets mean we are going to have softness at some point or another. But, the problem with the abrupt increases we had and now the embarking on the cutting cycle is that everything happens with such a lag. The expectation that the rate increases that we experienced would actually have harmful effects on the economy, that happens with an 18-month to 2-year lag. So look, I think it's fair to say, if you're judging the Fed on this, that they kind of did stick the landing at this point. But, so maybe worded better is to say, are we still at this point inevitably going to move into some period of softness? And, if we do, it may not have anything to do with it, or will have something to do with the Fed, but it may have more to do with what happens with the AI story, for example.
All right. So having said that, listen, you guys provide tech to registered investment advisors. You see a lot, I'm assuming, in terms of data. What are you seeing that's of interest in terms of where investors are looking to commit money, where they're pulling out of? What can you tell us a little bit about today's investment environment?
Well, I don't think it'll be revelatory, but wow, there's still a lot of cash on the sidelines, and people trying to lock in these cash rates. And to your point, we're hitting record highs in the S&P. It's somewhat of a shame to see, right? Because that not all that cash is short-term needs that really belongs in a short-term instrument. This is folks locking in, what are better rates than they've been able to get for, a decade. But at the same time, missing out on, even in a 60-40, much higher returns. So I think, if there's a big, single story, it's that. And then U.S., dominating. I think the cyclicality of markets notwithstanding, you're definitely seeing that home country bias come out of, again, a long period now of U.S. outperformance.
We just got about 45 seconds left. How are you or your clients thinking about the election? Just 3 weeks away. 3 weeks away tomorrow.
We tell everyone and we tell clients to stay steady. Slow and steady wins the race. And by that, I mean, it doesn't matter who wins the race. Stay in the markets and don't get spooked one way or the other. Democrat or Republican, markets tend to trend up.
All right, going to leave it on that note. Hey, Dana, great to catch up with you. Dana Dioria, she's Co-Chief Investment Officer over at Envestnet, as we mentioned, a provider of technology to banks and registered investment advisors, joining us there from Pennsylvania.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.